Welcome to Pithy Musings, episode 7. Got that right.
Right.
We're showing up with 7 in our sequence.
Sparkles,
because word of the year for Caroline was
sparkly.
That's right. And word of the year for me was brave. So here we are again. And we're here to dig into a topic that that many of us fear. Many of us fear receiving. Many of us fear giving. Some of us are more comfortable with, and we tend to be more comfortable with it when we understand a little bit more about our roles in it. And that's the topic of feedback.
Feedback rocks.
Feedback rocks. But before we go into it, where did we leave off last time in episode 6?
Well, the last episode was, why are we so afraid of conflict?
Yeah.
And I think what we unearthed in that episode is that healthy conflict is important and is a requirement in order to develop teams. But in advance of going into conflict, one needs trust, kind of as that foundation. Really interesting post conversation. We've actually been invited to go on another person's podcast to talk about this topic, because it did, I think it got a lot of people talking. And so it was our longest episode. Well done. One saying we're going to shorten the thing.
It's a big passionate topic, and we've also had mixed reviews on, some people say, the length is fine, I make space for it and whatnot. I think it's our partners who have been saying, let's just shorten it up a bit to wants to happen. So we're going to make an effort to do that today and see what happens, but we're not committing to the exact time.
No,
we're just saying it's going to be shorter.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm Eva Van Krugel with Fervor Leadership Coaching and Consulting. I'm with my beloved colleague.
I'm Caroline Berglund, principal of Talk Talk and the One Stop Special Needs Shop.
And the two of us have, just for a bit of a refresher, we've had a little bit of a summer break. We met on LinkedIn, I don't know, maybe almost a few years ago now, and we had never actually met. And so we finally had the privilege of being able to meet in person, and that was super special.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a video that is going to come out with us meeting, but I do have to give our viewers and watchers a teaser. I had no idea this meeting was about to happen. So Eva and her partner Jack live in Victoria. I and my partner live here in Calgary. They were visiting, and so Jack filmed it. They put a disco ball on the driveway. And we met, and there was hugs, and there was tears, and there was all of that stuff.
Yeah, it was brave, it was sparkly, and embodied the essence of two people who work in similar and related fields, who are not in competition with one another, but together we know that we believe that we can have even more impact in the world together and help put the funk back into humanity, which is what Pithy Musings is really all about. And one of the things we really pride ourselves on is the distinction that, yes, we work a lot with leaders in organizations and teams and so on. And yet the really important piece of Pithy Musings is that it's also bridging to just being human in the world, life at home, being in the community, being a human, with the premise that we believe that we can make it better together. And we can do that through learning and curiosity.
And I think this notion of just looking at the business part of oneself and independently and separately looking at the personal side of oneself is a very archaic way of looking at the world. We have to look at the whole human being in order to be better leaders within our organizations, better partners in our personal lives, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really about the whole human being, Pithy Musings.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Pithy Musings. So episode 7, as we said, the notion of feedback rocks. And it's hard to give it, hard to receive it. It can be fear-inducing. It can also be one of the greatest, coolest things that ever happens for someone, but getting there can be hard. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Caroline, on, in your huge expertise in lots of related spaces, why is feedback so important from your point of view?
Yeah, I think actually it is one of the hot topics right now, and it should be, because the way I have spent years in this space, helping organizations revamp their performance management process. I think the performance management process is frankly dead. And this is why I'll tell you that, because that whole annual review and let's do these quarterly syncs and let's do all of that, they really don't drive changed behavior. What drives changed behavior are cultures that support the following, and that is continuous quality feedback. So we're not waiting until the end of the week when I'm having a one-on-one with such and such to provide feedback. I'm not waiting at the end of the quarter. I'm not waiting at the end of the year. Something has happened, either positive or not so positive, and the feedback is given immediately. Those organizations that can and do that well can toss the performance management out the window because that's not required. Except for like calibration and compensation and all that, I'll give you that. But for eliciting and growing an individual, continuous quality feedback, real-time feedback, immediate feedback, it's important.
Yeah, and later on, I'm in full agreement with you. And it's funny, the performance management piece brings up a whole, I'm like, there's a topic on a whole other thing, which fodder for another day, maybe centered more on the workplace. But I also think about, feedback in relationship. So that could be, maybe you're volunteering on a board, maybe you're volunteering in fundraising. Maybe you're doing some neighbors are coming together at co-fund a fence. Not that I may be in any way, shape or form eventually dealing with that. And there's the dynamics of 5 different neighbors. And so might there be an opportunity in there to provide some feedback to one another, to see to it that it all happens smoothly, respectfully. So we do get into some do's and don'ts. Not that we claim to be like, you must and you shalt, but based on our experience, study out there in the world, we offer some thoughts there. So hopefully that gets to be pretty helpful. I can't imagine a life without feedback. And I think back to some of the hardest feedback I've ever received. And today's lens has me go back in time and go, oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I just at the time may not have had the maturity to accept it, or maybe the way that it was delivered put me on the defensive, or maybe I looked at all the negative, or I looked at maybe 98% was positive, but that 2% negative, I seized on that.
Well, that's how that works, right? I think I read this many, many years ago. I don't even know if it's accurate, but I'll throw it out there anyway. For every piece of constructive feedback one is given, you have to, in order to kind of erase that or, create better self-esteem, you have to give like 9 pieces of recognition. So it can, it can hurt. And I like to say that feedback is really the receiver's game. So oftentimes when we go to training around feedback, there's a lot of training on how to give it.
Yeah.
Here's a model, right? There's a model I use called FIT, facts, impact, thank you. Yes, thank you. But there isn't a lot of real substance around how do I receive this? Both recognition, because oftentimes people think, oh, constructive feedback is the really hard stuff to digest. Well, for some people, it's actually recognition. If it's not tailored to the individual. So as an example, recognition. I'm a pretty big extrovert. You could likely put me on a stage somewhere. I'd be like, yeah, that feels good. I'm getting recognition in this way. I would love that. But there are other people that I know, if you did that to them, it would have the opposite effect. It would be like, how dare you do this to me? So it's understanding the individual in which you're providing feedback, both from the positive or the recognition perspective, and also from the constructive feedback. I'll go one step further, and I'd say when you're giving constructive feedback, and I would love to hear some examples of where that hurt, because I know I've got a few, but there always is going to be a reaction. Always will be a reaction to constructive feedback. Now, it either can be visible, like crying, anger, whatever that might look like. We've all seen it, or it's non-visible, but there is a reaction going on. Yeah, because it's human nature to say, listen, I want to be kind of accepted for who I am today. And are you telling me I actually have to work on something?
I think something, the language of constructive feedback has been swimming around the universe for a long time, but there's an anchor in that. Constructive, positive intention toward the other. It's not saying what you're doing wrong. The idea that we actually really want the other person to succeed and grow, or we really want this relationship to strengthen, through trust and openness, and setting some healthy communication precedents, or creating the permission together that if I can share feedback, that you can also share feedback with me, but knowing that it's coming from a positive place. So constructive feedback. And no, go ahead.
No, you're hitting on something that is it's the nucleus of, I think, of what we're going to talk about today. And that is, we've heard the term, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. Brutally honest with me.
Thanks.
Be honest with me, rooted in kindness, and honesty. Don't be brutal with me. Leaders out there, if you're saying brutally honest and then going into the shit sandwich, please stop doing that, because there's no room for brutality in providing feedback. The intention should be of kindness, because the feedback is supposed to create a better product or a better behavior or a better whatever. You can't do that with brutality. So you're hitting on something I think that is really important.
Yeah, it's also, so it's fostering, we keep bringing up the notion of psychological safety. And I think, a big part of that, it threads through lots of topics that we'll bring forward here, but we keep seeing it in our day-to-day, in a lot of our client work, in working in organizations, teams at a macro level, micro level. We're seeing, and also in the volunteering community or in neighborhoods, whatever, we want to feel like we belong, and we want to feel like it's safe to be me. It's safe to make mistakes. It's safe to share opinions and ideas. And we've got a lot of work to do in the world, especially as things become increasingly, I feel like that's a whole other tangent, but I feel like the volume is going up on the light, the forces of the light and the dark, and, increased divisiveness over different beliefs, ideas, and so on. And we have some fences to mend.
Yeah.
And I don't say that lightly, because I do need to revisit this fence issue, but we do. We have,
no pun intended.
But we literally have fences to mend on many levels, and feedback can play a role in that, but it cannot be done without psychological safety.
And I only brought out one book today. Only one.
Just bring it.
And this is Carol Dweck. She talks about mindset. So in addition to all of the things that you were just mentioning around intentionality and positivity and mending fences, the other thing I think we need to bring to ourselves when giving feedback or receiving it is this notion of growth mindset. So there's this notion that I can continue to grow. I'm open to feedback, versus that fixed mindset that says, all learning is kind of stagnant. I know what I know, none of that. So she's written an entire book on why having that attitude of, yes, bring it, come. And if you're a leader or an employee in an organization, if you're not asking for feedback, then that's an indicator that maybe you're not on a psychologically safe team, because you should be. And not just general feedback like, what do you think I'm doing well, Eva? It's more about digging and mining for what can I improve upon. So if there's one thing that I can do differently in these Pithy Musings episodes, what might that be? That's an example of, you don't have to answer, you can.
Well, Caroline, don't mind if I do.
Don't mind.
Well, and we have had, way back when, we had well, it was, I don't think it was a conflict. It was us trying to figure things out. And we were having, we just weren't understanding one another. And we've had a few viewers actually ask us, like, what could you two possibly disagree on? What would possibly evoke a tense conversation where you were giving each other feedback, whatever. And it wasn't even anything major. We're learning about one another. And we were figuring out, it was an information disconnect and understanding. So in the end, we came to a stronger place.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it wasn't hard, but we came to a stronger place. And I believe a big part of that is, I think we share some values, but we also, we care about the relationship. We both want to be here. We want to make it safe for one another. And the growth mindset is about ongoing learning. We love learning.
That's it.
So in the discomfort, there was learning.
Yeah. And had we, either one of us, come to the table with that fixed mindset that, no, my way or the highway, or no, we're not gonna, then it wouldn't have been resolved. So there's a bunch of ingredients in this feedback puzzle. One is growth mindset, being open, that I know I don't know everything. We're growing and learning. The other was around psychological safety. The other is around intent.
Yes.
If I am going to provide someone feedback, constructive feedback in particular, and I have this notion of I'm going to get them. Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever been on the receiving end of that. I have, where,
do share an example.
I caught her doing something wrong, right? And so now I'm going to make a big to do about it. And that again was another unpsychologically safe team. I can't think of one of those. Well, not that would be that interesting, but here's an example of feedback. I have many, many, many examples, because for our viewers and listeners, what even I do, if you're not in our profession, know that we actually get probably more feedback than the average person, because we're putting ourselves out there. So if I'm doing a talk to a couple hundred people, people have an opinion. And sometimes it's, I loved her, she was great. But that's not always, right? Or I remember a time doing a focus group. This is many, many years ago. And I generally have a cap of 10 or 15 people in a focus group. Anything more, you're not getting the voice of everybody else, and they get frustrated. But I didn't really know that at the time. And the client had convinced me that, you know what, they only have this, whatever, in the evening, it's going to be 35 people. And I'm like, I've been facilitating training for 25 years now. I'll be able to handle it. Even though my boss at the time was like, that's a lot of people in focus group. I'm like, I got it. I got it. But what could happen? What could possibly happen? Well, a focus group is really meant to, in this particular case, was to ask their opinion on what was working well in the organization and what wasn't. We had specific questions that we're asking. And this is an opportunity for people to have their voices heard. So they're going to take it, right?
Yes.
And it was mayhem, Eva. Like, everybody's talking over one another. I'm trying desperately to pause and reset. It was out of control. And at one point, I have a note taker with me, and she's sitting there taking notes. At one point, this woman stands up and says, doesn't say anything. She's just pissed off, and you can see it. She's got a piece of paper and she throws it at my note taker and she walks out. And I didn't know what was going on. I'm like, what the hell is going on? I'm just desperately like sweat going, like trying desperately to get control of this situation. So the end of the session comes, and Sarah and I, the note taker, and I read the note, and it says, I won't get it verbatim, but it was, how dare you? How dare you only talk to the men in the room? Ooh. And I'm like, did I do that? Sarah, what? Sarah's like, no, but I was devastated. Yeah. And I had to phone the client the next morning to say, this happened. And I'm thinking about whether that feedback is actually accurate or not. And I have thought about it, and it is not accurate. It is not accurate. So there's why I tell that particular story is sometimes stuff like that is happening in the moment. You got to maintain your composure. I clearly knew something was going on. Maybe I should have stopped and gone out and asked, but that would have been far too distracting to the rest of the group. But sometimes you receive feedback, you look at it, you internalize it, you look at it at every angle. You might ask for another opinion like I did with Sarah, but ultimately that feedback was not accurate and I threw it out.
What strikes me in all of that is that we're receiving feedback sometimes when we least expect it. It can happen in random day-to-day. It's not necessarily a sit down and we're going to have a conversation and I'd like to offer you some feedback. Sometimes it's happening very organically where we're suddenly surprised by something positive, negative, neutral, whatever. And it can be feedback, and what might be the learning in that. Like if you could, in that moment, what did you learn from it that actually propelled you in future?
Well, it was interesting because it was a time where I was doing a lot. Well, I continue to, but I was doing a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of these big groups. And up until that point, I took in feedback almost 100%. So if it's said, it must be. Now, I can't circumvent the fact that that was her reality and whatever she was observing, but that wasn't my reality. So what I've learned from that experience many years ago is that there are times when you have to look at all the feedback. There's times some of it goes in the garbage. It just does. In fact, we were talking yesterday about Brene Brown, right? And the fact that I've just rewatched the Netflix special called Call to Courage. Yeah. And she says something that it completely resonates with me. If you are not in the arena getting your ass kicked on occasion because you were being brave, I am not interested in or open to your feedback about my work, period. You can't take feedback and criticism from those who are not brave enough with their lives. It will crush you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So what you choose to take on, there is room for that. What you choose to take, you have choice. You do have choice. And even in growth mindset, you have choice. It's okay to have healthy boundaries about certain things. I mean, you're reminding me of two completely opposing pieces of feedback I've received. One, years and years ago, I was an emerging leader within an organization, and I was having my annual performance review. And the person delivering it, I really love her, and I know that she was doing her best with what she had available to her. One of the biggest pieces of feedback she gave me was, I want you to listen to your gut more. And I remember being like, well, what do you mean? But anyways, looking back, I'm like, what an amazing packaged present that she gave me. It was the tipping point for me to realize that we have this amazing wisdom deep within.
Yeah.
That's not woo-woo. And for some people, maybe it is, there's a spiritual component, but I learned from that point on that by going on gut more, we have an inner knowing based on experience, perspective, all of it that got us to the very day that we're in, that has inner knowing that transcends logical, rational, cognitive functioning. And from there, I listened to gut a whole lot more. I also learned that there's wisdom in the heart, wisdom in the mind, wisdom in physiology. It became a whole thing for me just because she said that. And because I've listened to gut, it's positively impacted countless dimensions of my life, work, decision-making, certainty, all of those things. So that was a nice one.
Yes. Beautiful. And a tough one to teach, like, listen to your gut more. I mean, I'd be sitting there going, how do I do that? But what an interesting discussion.
Well, she's saying, in that time, she was like, I know you well enough to know that you actually know what you think you should do. And then you kind of, you spin a bit and you listen to others' perspectives, and and you're actually losing time and starting to enter the doubt stuff. And she said, I'd rather you go on gut, experiment, maybe even totally screw up. So that was a psychologically safe environment. Feedback beautifully shared.
Yep.
It could have been received on my end with a bit more maturity at the time. And what a gift in my learning and my future. The flip side was a very painful one. Was co-facilitating something, really putting myself out there in the arena, face down, and face back up again, and got some ratings, and the ratings were really positive, and it meant the world. There were a couple of randoms that were, there were a couple of open-ended comments. So here was the feedback.
Yep.
That I was man bashing. And I remember working with the co-facilitator, a beloved friend of mine, and saying, when did I man bash? Yeah. So I suddenly started to feel defensive, small.
Sure.
And the only thing that I could come to was when I mentioned, I remember being a woman in a mostly male executive team, and that there was this dynamic that I had to try and navigate effectively and with confidence, where when the men talked, there was eye contact between one another. When the women talked, they typed on their computers.
Yeah.
There was an anomaly male who was more respectful and inclusive.
Sure.
So I'm speaking to an experience, not as a weak victim, but as it was an opportunity for me to, and it was tying back to the curriculum. Whatever's going on around you, you can start with yourself and, strengthen these skills, blah, blah, blah. And that was a hard moment. What's going on in the system where that's happening? So I put myself out there sharing it. And then I received, a couple of comments, and I'm pretty sure I know who they were, that I was man bashing. And there are a lot of good men, and a lot of good men that I work with and know and am friends with. So that broke my heart. So that for me was an example of, in a growth mindset, maybe there's a way I can position things differently when it comes up. Maybe there's a way that I can also say, I've actually had this feedback and it's not at all what I mean. This was a real experience for me.
Yeah. So they talk about in feedback, or there's a video that I watched many years ago. I think it was a Harvard professor, forgive me, I don't remember her name, but she talks about the emotional swing upon receiving feedback. So everybody's got a baseline, right? So it's either zero, I've received the feedback at 0%, okay, great, to 3,000%. And a lot of that is determined by your own baseline personality. I think our personalities are a little bit amped up. So we're probably going to have bigger swings when we receive feedback. So with that particular pieces of feedback, like, where do you think that you fell on that continuum of swinging? Was it really big, like 2000, or was it 25?
Maybe sort of in 1,000, because I have at this point, I appreciate that we're all doing the best we can, bumbling along on the planet with the mindsets that we have, the experiences that we have, that it was two anomaly comments.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you heard the door slam, but I think there's some wind going through the, yeah. And I can't just sit here and ignore that. Let's be honest.
Maybe I should now relinquish the fact that you keep on freezing every 3 seconds. I hope I'm doing a pretty good job at.
You're doing an amazing job. I would have
pretending like I can see your eyes.
Am I frozen right now?
No, you're good right now. You're going in and out. We've been having this problem for a week anyway.
Well, maybe when I freeze, that's some feedback on your end to start shimmying your shoulders, and then I'll know. Yeah, but I think I appreciate the question, because there's choice in that, and I just gained my perspective, looked at the facts, looked at the data, looked at the other, I don't know, 28 out of 30 people's comments and ratings, and I just stayed grounded, and I thought momentarily on what I could do differently, and in the end, I had to give it a pass. I just had to go, this is not mine. I do not believe that this is mine, and that is okay.
Well, and it's a great illustration of one where you kind of toss it away. I mean, I think of so many in which I had a 3,000% swing. I was right, but they were right, and I didn't understand in the moment.
Whoa.
So one time I was learning how to teach a program. This is, okay, I'll age myself, 26 years ago.
So you were a toddler.
And the program that I was teaching was all about human relations. Like, who the hell was I thinking that I should be teaching people, far more wise than me, this program? But anyway, I took the program, became what is called the graduate assistant, and then and did the work and came to what they call a certification workshop. Mm-hmm. So it's 5 days where you've got a master trainer. And then I think there were 6 of us. At the very end, they bring in real people from the street, where they get a hugely discounted rate on the program, because we're all trainers. So we're all sitting at the back of the room. You've got these live people. Everybody is scared out of their mind. I'm thinking 24-year-old version of Caroline would have been shitting herself. And she should have, frankly. What did she know about doing any of this? So it's actually my turn. I'm going to kick off the program. And each one of us are going to go up, kind of taking different sections of each module. Live people, bums and seats. So I go up and I do my thing. And while I'm up there, I'm like, I'm hitting my groove. I know what I'm doing. Yeah, this is going great. Oh, I'm nailing it. Walk to the back of the room where the master trainer says to me, like, she goes like this. This is a woman I deeply respect to this day. She says, who do you think you are? Now you got to remember, Eva, I had to still go up and do a bunch. I'm like, what is this feedback? What do you mean? Who do you think? It wasn't until a solid 10 years later that I understood what she meant. It took me 10 years to digest this feedback, because at the time, I think I was putting on a show.
But so what was the feedback?
The feedback was I was putting on a show. You were of service to the people in this workshop. This isn't about you performing, being some actress on some stage and, eloquently restating the lines from the manual. And I didn't fully get it until I was like knee deep in a workshop, and hair is all over the place. My glasses are dirty. I'm like on the floor, just trying to help these participants get out of whatever we were trying to do. And I had a moment that said, that's what she meant. You're not putting on a show right now. You are certainly not putting on a show. So do you have an example like that where whether you got it immediately or it took many, many years later, where you went, that feedback was accurate?
Well, I'll go back to the former example to thread it together. And I also just acknowledge what a hard learning.
Right?
Wow.
I bawled.
Oh,
Not at the moment, but when I got back to the hotel room. And that was my emotional reaction. Like, even she was trying to explain it to me after. So she didn't just leave me hanging like that, but I didn't get it from instinctually. I didn't understand what she was talking about. I didn't think I was doing that.
Now,
it's kind of like the old Tony Robbins, right? Commercials or infomercials. It comes across as kind of a used car salesman. No disrespect to used car salesmen, but you know what I mean. I think he's different now. I've seen, I'm not your guru. I think he's evolved. Anyway, but yeah, I think it was a profoundly important, 5 words that she spoke to me, and it changed the fiber of who I am and what I do.
Mm-hmm. But I do wonder, might it have been packaged or positioned differently than it was, where it may have sunken in a more comforting but actionable way?
Well, and I don't know even, I think she knew me. If it was too soft, I likely wouldn't have heard it. I wouldn't have heard it. I think she was trying to jolt me. Yeah. And I think it was an appropriate, would I teach others to provide feedback in such a way? No. But it was her way of understanding who I am. And it was effective. Mm-hmm. And it came from a place of kindness, by the way. So it came from a genuine place of, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't be the star at the front of the room. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so that gets into knowing the person, and you mentioned that earlier on, the value of, know who you're dealing with. At the same time, what if you don't know who you're dealing with? How do you position it in a way that acknowledges the person, gets the point across, does so with kindness versus brutality, and creates a learning opportunity and a connection opportunity? If you don't know the person that well, but you need to give some feedback, how do you handle that? And I think we get into a bit of that in our do's and don'ts. The very practices that we continue to bring up in other episodes around just the very basic structures of empathy and curiosity. How can I learn what it's like to be you? I think back to that tough feedback from a couple of folks. Was it appropriate that it was shared like that, where it would go to a whole authority and be submitted to an authority? Let alone, was there a different venue? Could they have approached me maybe during a break and said, there was a comment that you made and I'd like to understand more. Here's how I'm perceiving it. Yeah. That makes me uncomfortable and I'd like to know more.
And I would even say that's weaselly. Let's call a spade here. If you have feedback for someone and you're hiding behind an evaluation form, stop that. Go and have a conversation, and then it's a conversation where you actually can ask some questions. You can provide more commentary, or you can apologize if that's how it was received. Like you can do something in a conversation. I can't do anything with words on a piece of paper.
I'm with you. And I think, we also can't know what for 30 people in that environment, where they each come from, what might be triggering for them, what some cultural nuances might be. Many of us are trying the best that we can to learn as much as we can to be conscious and awake and inclusive and address the various needs, but sometimes it's tricky.
Well, what about this phrase? It reminds me of this. If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. Where did we learn that?
I don't know, grade.
Our parents, right? Or grade 1. That's bad advice.
Yeah.
Bad advice. If it should be the opposite. I mean, you should be providing feedback with a good intent so that people can grow and get better. So I think I cut you off because you weren't frozen there. So
yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So I think, we've gone through some of the stories, how feedback transcends, like there's a role for receiver and giver, and that it can happen feedback can be hard and unkind and brutal. And feedback can also be create learning moments and connective tissue between people and present growth opportunity. Do we want to dig into some of the, maybe from a feedback giving perspective? Do you want to dig into some do's and don'ts?
Yeah, I do want to share. I know we are looking at trying to wrap up, but I want to share with you a story that is the singular best feedback moment I've ever seen in my 50 years on the planet. So as everybody knows, or maybe you don't know, I spent a lot of time on the airplane, obviously pre-COVID, a little trepidatious about getting on a plane again, not gonna lie. But as such, I don't often get the chance to drop my son Atticus off at school. So many years ago, and one client is laughing right now because I used to tell this story in revamping their performance management program as a great example of providing feedback. So one day I did have the chance to drop him off at school. And I had enough time that I was actually gonna sit in on the class. So I somehow shoved my bum in one of those little toddler chairs, right? And they were always open to, you want to sit in, don't want to sit in. This is a special needs school, by the way, for viewers and watchers. So it's a vast difference in terms of who's in the classroom. You've got verbal, you got nonverbal, you got different genetic anomalies, whatever. So, so the teacher has a flip chart at the front of the class, and she also has a smart board, like one of those big smart boards. And on the smart board, she puts a picture of a butterfly. I think it was an African butterfly, I'm not quite sure. And she says, any volunteers? And so one of the kiddos gets up to the flip chart. I think his name was Scotty. He was the best. He goes, oh, he's super excited, like doesn't know what the task is. Yeah. She goes, what I'd like you to do is draw that butterfly. So he goes ahead and he goes on the flip chart and draws a butterfly. Teacher, she was such a good teacher, looks at the students and says, do they look the same? And everybody's politely like, those that could communicate are like, yeah, good job, Scott. She goes, really? Could he do anything a little bit differently to make that butterfly look more like that butterfly? And so one of the little girls in the audience says, not to be mean, Scott, not to be mean. I'm not being mean, but those antennas need to be a little bit longer. And Scotty's like, yeah, they do. Yeah. So he takes out his marker and he does the adjustments. Teacher goes back and says, anybody else, does it look the same? So one of the students stands up and says, well, you got to put some color on this thing. Like it's just black and white. So Scott says, well, who's going to get me some colored markers? Yes, you're absolutely right. So this goes on and on and on. And her message at the end is, we're just trying to make a better butterfly. And unless you give him feedback, or any of us feedback, we're not going to make a better butterfly. So I think it's such a beautiful way to showcase that you're not being mean, providing feedback. The end product looked so much better. And Scotty, the character in the story I just told, was never offended. In fact, he was so appreciative.
Interesting. And so totally, so I love the story. And I love how Scotty reacted the way that he did. And he's like, well, who's going to get me the colors? And so there's something in the dynamic that made it safe. In the beginning of the story, I was like, what was wrong with what he did in the first place? I mean, he got up there and he did this thing and he created some artwork and he was brave. What's wrong with what he did? So there's something in the dynamic that happened there by the sounds of it, where he felt safe and he knew that her intentions were positive to build on something.
Well, it's the tone of the leader, the tone of the teacher, who is the leader in that room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that story. It's a bit of it's an emotional journey. It is a little bit of a journey and it's so visual. I love that.
It's so funny because when that happened, it was like, and I got to the office and I like, because oftentimes as trainers and facilitators, you're looking for real world stories that will resonate with the folks. And I knew I was going to be training hundreds and hundreds of people in this new model. And how do you leap that off of the page? And I can talk about Brene Brown and all this, but when I talk about my own personal experiences, oftentimes those are the ones that people remember.
Yeah. Well, and what strikes me too is wherever you're living, existing, experiencing, learning, working, that change and complexity are not going away. Whether it's change and complexity in ourselves or in another person or in group dynamics or in circumstances, environment, all of it. And so we need mechanisms to continue to learn so we can adapt in it all. And feedback plays a really important role in that, both the capacity to give it and receive it. I've had some feedback from some of my clients, for example, who, bless your hearts, you're so loyal listening to the Pithy Musings podcast. And they've often commented that they really appreciate some of the tips or hints or practical things. We get through these concepts and these story shares and whatnot, and they enjoy the how. Because of course, in coaching, I can't tell them the how. Of course, I can share stuff, after session and certainly in workshops like you and I do. So do we want to give into some do's and don'ts, maybe starting with the giving feedback?
Yeah, I would love to hear your do's and don'ts.
Well, yours too. I think one is ask. So, a big one that I'm seeing emerging is asking permission.
Although, I know I keep on pausing you, but I like this topic.
Yeah.
But it's also tonality, body language, all of that, because I've had people say to me, "Hey, Caroline, can I give you feedback?"
Yeah.
And my immediate reaction is, "Oof, someone's just hit me in the face because I know it's coming and I better anchor my feet deep into the sound because I'm about to get constructive feedback."
Yeah.
Right. So when you say, "May I give you feedback?" be cognizant of how you're saying that.
So can you give an example?
I'd like to I would be more specific because it's pretty ambiguous. Like, are we going to talk about my personality? What are we going to talk about? I'd like to give you some feedback on that last meeting that we were just in. Do you have a couple of minutes? So the receiver automatically knows that I'm not going to get fired.
Yes.
Like, you don't know where someone's going to go when you say, "May I give you feedback?"
Yeah. And also to create space for, I'd love to share some feedback from that meeting. And I'd really love to hear how you think it went as well.
Absolutely.
So that it's two-way. So I think, the opposite of that, a don't, would be, is partially what you just said. And also, can we just take a second? I'd like to just offer something brutally honest about what just happened.
Right.
That is, I want to say who does that, but it's happening. It's happening a lot. Yeah. And it can really shut people down and make them feel small and reduce trust, all of that. Another one we've touched on already, which is, to the best of our ability, in the moment or close to the moment versus a year later. When you did that thing a year ago, that has been sitting with me since you did that.
And for those of us that has happened to, it is deeply, deeply disrespectful of the relationship that you couldn't or wouldn't take the time, real time, to carve out space to help me, because that's what feedback is. And then you're waiting several months later.
But it's happened to me some years ago. And then I'm like, it made me feel like, oh my God, so have I been walking around a complete fraud?
Right.
Oh God. So, and that is a horrible feeling. Just that one moment in time can be so damaging. We all fundamentally, many people don't want to admit it, but the truth is a lot of people really care about being liked and respected.
Yeah, for sure.
And that moment right there can crush a person's spirit.
But I'll liken it to this, and this might sound gross. It just came to me.
Gross?
But if you are hesitant to provide someone with constructive feedback, I don't think I've ever said this out loud. It just came to me.
Drum
But
roll.
if someone has something hanging, a booger hanging from their nose,
Yeah.
and that person goes through the whole day and they end up face to face with you,
Tell them about
and
the
nobody
booger.
tell them about the booger. Like, if you're hesitant to provide that feedback, look at it with that same sense of urgency. Yeah, they might be embarrassed. They might be, oh God. But what if you weren't the person that stopped that person from going the rest of their day with a booger in their nose?
No, you'd go
Your
home.
job,
Why
yeah,
didn't anybody tell me?
right, or the spinach in the teeth, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It might be embarrassing, it might be uncomfortable, but you got to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. A couple of weeks ago, I don't know if it was spinach or maybe basil, however you pronounce it. And I think I maybe had some basil in my canine. But I wasn't around people that knew me, maybe well enough to whatever. Anyways, basil. And I'm just throwing ideas out there, and I, you always share what you think back. So, and I want to hear yours too. So, one is like without shame and blame. And, yeah, I mean, we're talking a little bit about that. There's ways we can do it when there is shaming and there's blaming and there's persecution. And there's another way to be doing it with a spirit of generosity and positive intention, which is some of what we've talked about.
Yeah, I think for me, for those that are watching and listening, my recommends are around check your intent.
Yeah.
It's so important. Check your attitude, growth mindset, and follow a model. Like, whatever that model is, I think it's important to have a model, because oftentimes people think that their feedback skills are good. And in fact, if we dissect them, they're really not.
Mm-hmm.
So on a recognition perspective, I like to say there's a 25-cent compliment, love your glasses, Eva, versus a $20 compliment, which is, the fact that we get to do Pithy Musings and we get to collaborate on various projects. The fact that you come prepared and you're fun to work with, you are a true conscientious individual where I learn a ton from. The impact that you've had on me is immeasurable, in the sense that I actually think you're changing my life. Thank you.
I'm going to just pull out the $1,000 bill that I'm hiding in my desk.
So that's a $20 compliment, right? And it followed a process. I gave a bunch of facts. Mm-hmm. I talked about the impact that you've had on me based on those facts, and then finish off with a genuine thank you. There's a big difference. And for those that are watching and just going, good job, stop it. That's not feedback.
Yeah.
That's not recognition.
Yeah. So, and I appreciate the example, and right back at you.
Mm-hmm.
Just have a sip so that you understand that. That's the marking of it really soaking in. And that also points to giving examples versus being nebulous. So, and again, what you're also highlighting that I love is feedback can be like in the recognition space, like positively reinforcing feedback. So feedback is not just about hard moments and learning. It can also be super positive acknowledgement and positive reinforcement, but giving examples really, really helps. In a previous life, I used to work in the engagement space and surveys and all that. And I'm going to get these percentages wrong, but I'm going to say what I think it was, that 66% or 70% of employees, like Canada-wide, North American-wide, like data, don't feel as though they are adequately recognized. And if you take that one step further from more of an organizational design brain or a consulting brain, people leave organizations because of their managers, and oftentimes their managers are not actually saying, I see you. Like, I think ultimately people want to feel value and valued. Yes. And that comes through recognition. People, and that's reminding me of, it's some coaching language, but I think this is some of the most powerful language we can remember in the world as humans. And that is, We each want to be seen, heard, and understood.
Yes.
And it's primal, and it serves sense of belonging. And so if we hold that in our heads and hearts when we go into conversation, even if you're receiving or you're giving, if we remind, we want to be heard, seen, and understood.
Yeah.
And I think, magic can happen, and we let a lot of the judgment, assumption, narrative, the MSUs, such as Brene Brown uses, making shit up. Let some of that go. Am I in judgment right now? Am I in judgment in how I'm receiving? Am I in judgment in how I'm giving? So, and back to the examples thing, something that I notice we can really slip away from is when we're in a comfortable relationship, or relationships that we've been in for a long time. They could be familial, they could be intimate, they could be, friendships that are familial, and we can forget to give examples. And, as an example, Jack and I have been together for almost 14 years. It's funny. We could be together for 13 years and 1 month. But then when we kind of annoy one another, we'll be like, for 14 years. So it'll be like in November, 14 years and 1 month, we'll be like, for 15 years. And, when that card gets pulled out, we're probably just disconnected and tired and probably just need to go on a date and we're fine. But we can forget to give those specific examples. And so we've had to work at that. Like, can you give me an idea when? And it's not to get combative, it's to understand when I'm doing it so I can pay attention to it. Yeah. So that's been really, really, really helpful.
And I think you're onto something there. I think, we're talking about the professional, but, the people that we probably don't recognize as much, and we should, are our friends and people that are closest around us.
When was the last time? It's funny. I have this deck of cards, and I like to shuffle them in the morning. And I was given them from my dear friend Laura Hillis, and they're from discoverbrave.com. And today's was I am enough.
I'm enough.
And I pull it out to bring out energy into the space for my clients, my colleagues. I am enough, and that's another thing. We each want to know that we're enough, even if there's a hard moment or a hard learning or recognition. So loved ones, what can we do? What can we say to let you know you are the friggin' bee's knees? You are so much more than enough. And I'm so glad that you're here.
It's funny because my partner, we had a date night, and the other night, and we probably stayed up a little bit later than we should on a school night. And the next morning he said, I dig your company. And it was just recognition of, I like you. We have good fun, right? And in that short little sentence, it made a big difference. It gave me.
I love that. Yeah. Nice job, Peter. And I also, Peter.
He's British.
Yes. The Brit. Yeah. And it that reminds me of a few other things, and I'll stay off the tangents, but yes. Okay. What else do we have here? So, so we said give examples versus being nebulous or just skipping over the examples, speaking to facts, and, positive needs and wants versus making it personal.
Yeah.
This happened. And when that happens, it makes me feel, and what I need from you in the future is, how do you feel about what I just said?
We'll challenge you on something that you said.
Yeah, I
do. When someone says it's not personal,
it's
just business.
It's just business.
I don't like that, because it is personal. It's about me. So it is personal. And it is, all feedback is attached to emotion. And it's the reason why we remember it. For the feedback that is emotionless, more on that 0% of that swing, you don't really remember it. The ones that are at the 1,000, like your example, 2, you don't forget that stuff. That's going to be with you at, in your rocking chair at 99. Yeah. So I do think it's personal.
I'm glad you're bringing that up. I think as long as we're not shaming and blaming for the earlier comment, where I also have a bit of a bias is in the engaged feedback model. So for another how, anyone listening, watching, I invite you to look up engaged feedback model. You'll find it in Brene Brown's Dare to Lead material or Daring Greatly material. And it's a set of sort of 10 principles. You don't have to follow all of them. You can follow some of them. And some of it really embodies a fair bit of what we've been talking about. But the personal comment, one of the principles is, let's put this in front of us. Let's sit shoulder to shoulder instead of tete-a-tete. And to be clear, for those who don't speak French, tete-a-tete is head to head. And so instead, be shoulder to shoulder. And let's put this thing in front of us, not between us, which is a way of, it's not that it's not personal or there's not emotions, but it's a way of being able to, be able to look at it with a bit more objectivity. And I absolutely hear you. So, and also just personal attack, straight up, just not personally attacking someone's person.
Yeah.
No. We don't need to do that. That's not constructive, nor is it kind. No. Anything else you'd add to the giving space before we run into receiving?
Yeah, let's go into the receiving. And so, like everything, I think a model is helpful. One might say, well, really, for all the real reasons that a model is important for providing recognition, that 25 cents versus $20 using FIT. I also think facts, impact, solution, or FIS is something that you want to contemplate using moving forward in terms of providing feedback. So it follows the same thing. What are the facts? What are the impact on to yourself, the team, the whatever? And then you solution the problem with one another. So it's not constructive feedback just being given to you. It's one that encourages discussion. I will say, as kind of a last comment around receiving constructive feedback, is it's hard. And it is a skill that needs to be practiced, and maintaining composure, if possible, is hard. But remember, it's just feedback, and feedback is an indicator of someone else's perception. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So I would sit in all feedback that you get. And as some of the examples that we provided, some of it goes straight into the garbage.
Yeah.
And some of it you hold in, and it actually changes some part of you and makes you a better butterfly.
Ah, nice. I see what you did there.
See what I did there?
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. Lovely. I guess a few thoughts. We can't say it enough. We'll probably keep saying it. Listen, truly listen to hear and be curious versus getting defensive. And that can include body language. If this is a classic one. I will sometimes sit like this because it's comfortable. And yet, whether we're giving or receiving, open.
Yeah. That's very good. The whole body language thing as it relates to providing feedback, it's a full contact sport. And what I mean is that you have to be cognizant of body language, tone, and the words that you say. Not they work in concert. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, and and eye contact can be a piece of it too. On the other hand, in one sense, if we're sort of looking away or we're looking down. That can also be someone's sense of safety, or there could be a cultural difference where eye contact is not a place we go. So I want to acknowledge that. Again, to something that you said, when we're receiving or we're giving, actually being open-minded versus closed. And that goes to the growth mindset. Anybody can look up Carol Dweck's work on that. And just remember, growth, not fixed. If you walk away with that alone, it can be game-changing, not only in feedback. Seeking understanding, and that really comes through curiosity and empathy. Seek understanding versus assuming and judging in narrative. So some of the same stuff as giving, but on the receiving side, if you're not understanding, or you're not getting the facts, you're not getting the data, or it was delayed feedback and it came a year later, it's okay to ask. And understand, for what reasons has it come to me a year later?
Yeah.
And for what reasons are you carrying this and not openly talking to me about it? Is there something we can do in our relationship and in our communication together where, right? So that's courageous language. But seek understanding.
I give our listeners, watchers full permission to say, I was watching Pithy Musings, and Caroline and Eva said, if I am surprised by any of my feedback that I get in my performance review, I can tell you you've not done your job. Because it should be real-time, continuous quality feedback.
Yeah. And if you are also let's say a leader in an organization or another kind of system, to simply say, have you ever heard the thing where if the person in charge of this thing says nothing, you're doing a good job.
Right.
Say something.
Yeah. That's weaselly as well.
Something. And also tune in that if it's a recognition thing, not everybody likes big public on stage, but just say something. Agreed. It's not just getting a paycheck and not having any feedback and sitting in a cone of silence that says, I'm performing well and I belong here.
Yeah.
Give feedback.
Yes.
Talked about body language. And I would also say it's okay if you feel a little hot under the collar. If you feel emotionally triggered and you can't be your best self, that it would be completely okay. You have choice to have a timeout.
Pause. Yes. It could be 5 minutes. It could be a day. It could even be a week. Absolutely. You're the receiver of this information. You determine how long you need to machinate on that.
Yeah. And, the last thing I would offer is to an earlier point in our conversation around, you also have choice as to what you take on or don't. Mm-hmm. And if you think about, all the circumstances, all the facts, if you look at out of how many people gave you these 5 stars or 4.5 stars out of 5, whatever, if 1 or 2, there's a bit of a rub, what's really going on there? And how much of that is yours to own? So we don't just go down the spiral, the shame spiral. Yeah. Anything else you'd add for receivers?
One last thing, and I just want to clear the elephant in the room when we're talking about feedback, because people always say, it's a gift. And where that's kind of cheesy and cliche, to me is, if someone's taking the time, particularly to provide me constructive feedback, they got their whole own emotional thing that they got to do in order to make that happen. So really, look, again, about mindset, look at it from that perspective. And even if feedback is delivered to you with ill intent, look at it. Yeah. Look at it, because there might be a nugget of truth in there. And if there is a nugget of truth in there, then you'll only grow as a result of that.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I love that.
It's a wrap.
Well, I think it's a wrap. And I don't know if we're under an hour or whatever.
I think it's about the same.
I am enough.
You are enough.
You are more than enough. One thing in the discussion that we appreciate or learned, inspired by, or piqued our interest?
Yeah, for me, I love the examples, right? On both sides. I think they really bring any kind of theoretical concept to life. Mm-hmm. So I like your examples. What about for you?
Oh, I love your butterfly story. It was gripping.
Gripping. Well, you should see the full length version. So the client that has heard that story a gajillion times will say that's like a 10-second version of like a 5-minute story. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no. I love that. And I always love your energy and what you bring. And there's just so many different, there's the humor, the new takes on learning or new frameworks. I'll always be reminded of things or a refresher or maybe a new little nugget. And your energy is just so much fun. So
right back at you. Yes.
So mug draw. Yeah. I want to propose that if you want a mug, write us in comments on the YouTube channel. And tell me if you agree with this. We didn't talk about this. If you want a mug, they're like sizable mugs. They hold a good amount of lemon water, coffee, beer,
liquid, any liquid,
matcha, matcha. So if you want one, just, I don't know, write in comments and tell us why you think you should have a Pithy Musings mug. And we will look at that and we will
get a mug.
And if you also have something that you want to share to put the funk back into humanity, to help us to have a more conscious, creative, awake, less divisive world, we want to hear from you. You might have an idea. Let's talk about it. You might want to be interviewed and be on Pithy Musings. Present yourself. We'd love to hear from you. What else, Carolyn? I guess episode 8 will be coming soon.
Yeah, and if you have ideas on future episodes, as you know, we don't really have that set up, in advance. So with that, I'm going to say join in. Oh, wait, before we do that, I want you to make sure that you're subscribing to the YouTube channel. We want to extend our appreciation and gratitude for the thousands and thousands of views of each of the episodes we've received thus far. We really are appreciative of that. So until next time.
Go to talktalk.ca if you want to talk to Carolyn. Go to livewithfervor.com if you want to talk to me and you have feedback. And stay pithy.
Keep musing. Thanks, Eva.
Thank you.